People often think that loneliness only hurts the young, but the truth is, it can crush even the strongest hearts. In a quiet suburban neighborhood in the U.S., there lived an elderly woman named Margaret, a grandmother who once had a house full of laughter, family dinners, and the sweet chaos of children running around. But now, her days were marked by silence. Her children had grown busy with their own lives, rarely visiting. She spent most afternoons staring out the window of her small living room, watching families walk by with their kids, feeling invisible in a world that once revolved around her love and care. Margaret's house was neatly kept, but it felt cold, like a museum of memories no one cared to visit. Framed photographs of her children and grandchildren sat on dusty shelves, and though she looked at them daily, the real people behind those smiles rarely knocked on her door. The phone hardly rang, except for telemarketers, and her heart longed for a voice to call her grandma again, not just in faded pictures, but in real life, with real hugs. One chilly autumn evening, as the golden leaves danced outside her window, Margaret whispered to herself, "Does anyone even remember me anymore?" That question hung in the air like a shadow. She felt forgotten, neglected, and yet little did she know, life was preparing a twist that would light up her world again. This is where the story of pain turns into one of hope. The next morning, Margaret sat at her small kitchen table, sipping lukewarm tea from a chipped floral mug she had owned for decades. The house was so quiet that even the ticking of the old wall clock felt loud. She thought about calling her daughter, but a voice inside her said, "Don't bother her, she's probably busy." With a heavy sigh, she folded her hands and stared at the empty chair across from her. The same chair where her late husband once sat, sharing breakfast and silly jokes. Now, that chair was just empty. But fate has a way of stepping in when we least expect it. That very afternoon, a knock echoed through her front door, sharp and unexpected. Margaret's heart skipped a beat. Visitors were rare. She shuffled to the door, her hands trembling slightly as she turned the knob. Standing there was her young granddaughter, Lily, just 8 years old, with messy brown hair, rosy cheeks, and eyes full of innocence. She clutched a small stuffed rabbit in one hand and looked up with a shy smile. "Grandma," Lily whispered softly, as if afraid her voice might break the silence of the house. Margaret froze. She hadn't seen Lily in months. Maybe even longer. For a moment, she wondered if she was dreaming. Tears welled up in her eyes as she reached out and pulled the little girl into her arms, hugging her tightly as if she'd never let go. The warmth of that tiny embrace melted through all the cold walls of loneliness she had been living behind. "Grandma, can I stay with you for a while?" Lily asked, her voice trembling with both hope and fear. And just like that, Margaret's life, once defined by silence, began to flicker with the sound of love returning. Margaret knelt down so she could look Lily in the eyes, her frail hands gently resting on the little girl's shoulders. "Of course, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice breaking with emotion. "You can stay as long as you like." For the first time in years, her living room echoed with a voice other than her own. Lily walked in, her small sneakers squeaking against the polished wooden floor. She glanced around, her eyes widening at the shelves filled with old family photos and the faint smell of fresh lavender from the potpourri bowl on the table. To Lily, the house felt like a treasure chest of stories waiting to be told. She ran her fingers over a framed photograph of Margaret as a young woman standing proudly beside her late husband. "Grandma, is this you?" she asked, with childlike wonder. Margaret's lips curved into a smile that had been absent for far too long. "Yes, my dear, that was me a long time ago, when your grandpa was still here." Her voice softened at the mention of him, but Lily's innocent curiosity replaced sorrow with something warmer: connection. They sat together on the couch, and Lily snuggled into Margaret's arms, holding her stuffed rabbit close. "I like it here," Lily said quietly. "It feels safe." Those words pierced Margaret's heart, not with pain, but with hope. She hadn't realized how deeply she needed someone to remind her of her worth. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in strokes of pink and gold, Margaret found herself cooking dinner, not just for one, but for two. She hummed an old tune, while Lily set the table clumsily, placing spoons and forks in the wrong places. Margaret didn't correct her, she only smiled, because suddenly life didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive again. That night, the little house felt different, alive, almost as if it had been waiting for this moment. After dinner, Margaret tucked Lily into the guest room, a small space that hadn't been used in years. The bedspread still carried the scent of cedar from the wooden chest nearby, and the soft lamp glow gave the room a warm, golden comfort. As Margaret pulled the blanket over Lily, the little girl whispered, "Grandma, can you tell me a story? Mommy never has time." The words hit Margaret like a gentle storm, sweet, but painfully true. She swallowed the ache in her chest and smiled, brushing Lily's hair back. "Of course, sweetheart," she replied. And so, she began weaving an old family tale, her voice soft and melodic, filling the silence that once felt unbearable. Lily's eyes sparkled with wonder as she listened, her small hands clutching her stuffed rabbit tighter. By the end of the story, the girl had drifted off to sleep, a peaceful smile resting on her face. Margaret stood by the bedside, watching Lily breathe, her tiny chest rising and falling in rhythm. For years, she had gone to bed in silence, staring into the darkness, with nothing but her own thoughts. But tonight she realized something. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't forgotten. She mattered, at least to this little soul who had found her way back. When she returned to her own room, Margaret sat on the edge of her bed, her eyes glistening. She whispered into the still night, "Thank you, God, for sending her to me." For the first time in a long time, she drifted into sleep with a heart full of peace instead of emptiness. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting golden stripes across the wooden floor. Margaret woke up earlier than usual, her heart carrying a spark of excitement she hadn't felt in years. She made her way to the kitchen, the air filled with the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the sound of birds chirping outside. But this time, she wasn't just preparing breakfast for herself, she was preparing it for two. She scrambled eggs, toasted bread, and even squeezed fresh orange juice, something she hadn't bothered with in a long time. Soon, the sound of small footsteps echoed in the hallway. Lily appeared, still in her pajamas, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Good morning, Grandma," she said with a yawn, her voice soft but cheerful. Margaret's heart swelled at those two simple words. "Good morning, my love," she replied warmly, pulling out a chair for her. They sat together at the small round table, sunlight washing over them. Lily giggled as she spread too much jam on her toast, leaving sticky fingerprints on the plate. Margaret laughed too, a genuine laugh, one that felt like music after years of silence. As they ate, Lily suddenly asked, "Grandma, can I come here every weekend?" Margaret nearly dropped her spoon. Her throat tightened, and she blinked back tears, hiding them behind a smile. "Of course, sweetheart. This will always be your home." That breakfast wasn't just a meal, it was a moment of healing. For the first time in years, Margaret felt like life was giving her a second chance. And in the sparkle of Lily's innocent eyes, she saw not only love, but a promise. She was no longer forgotten. Later that day, Margaret decided to do something she hadn't done in years. Open the curtains wide, let the fresh breeze in, and truly live in her home again. She watched Lily wander around the living room, curious about everything. The little girl ran her hands across the piano that sat silently in the corner, covered with dust. "Grandma, do you play this?" Lily asked, her voice full of wonder. Margaret hesitated. Once upon a time, she used to play for her children, filling the house with melodies. But as the years passed and the loneliness grew, she had stopped. "I used to," she admitted softly, almost ashamed. "Can you play for me?" Lily's eyes lit up like a spark, and Margaret couldn't say no. She walked over, brushed the dust off the keys, and sat down slowly. Her fingers trembled as they touched the keys, stiff from years of silence. She pressed down gently, and a faint note echoed in the room. Then, with Lily watching intently, Margaret began to play a simple, soft tune she remembered from long ago. At first, the sound was shaky, but soon the melody flowed, filling the house with warmth. Lily clapped her hands in delight, her laughter dancing with the music. At that moment, Margaret felt something stir inside her, like her old self was slowly coming back to life. She realized that she hadn't just been forgotten by others, she had started to forget herself too. And now, thanks to this little girl's love, she was rediscovering who she really was. As the last note lingered in the air, Lily whispered, "Grandma, that was beautiful. Can you teach me someday?" Margaret smiled through teary eyes. "Yes, my darling, I'd love nothing more." The piano, once silent like her heart, had come alive again. That evening, the sky outside glowed with shades of purple and orange as the sun set. Margaret and Lily sat together on the porch, wrapped in a soft knitted blanket that Margaret had made years ago. Lily leaned against her grandmother's shoulder, holding her stuffed rabbit while swinging her small legs back and forth. "Grandma," Lily asked in a thoughtful tone, "were you lonely before I came?" The question pierced Margaret's heart. For a moment, she wanted to protect the child from the truth, to say no, to smile and pretend. But looking into Lily's innocent eyes, she realized honesty was more important. "Yes, sweetheart," Margaret admitted softly. "I was very lonely. I missed having someone to talk to, someone to love." Her voice cracked slightly, but she quickly added, "But now, with you here, I don't feel that way anymore." Lily looked up at her, her eyes filled with childlike sincerity. She wrapped her tiny arms around Margaret's waist and said, "I'll never let you be lonely again, Grandma. I promise." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes as she hugged the little girl tightly, the kind of hug that stitched broken pieces of the heart back together. In that moment, she realized something extraordinary. It didn't take the whole world to make her feel seen again. All it took was one little soul who loved her unconditionally. As the evening grew darker, Margaret whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. She thought of how easily her life could have faded into silence forever. But now, because of Lily, it was glowing brighter than ever. And deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning of a love that would heal them both. The next day was Saturday, and Margaret decided to surprise Lily with something special. She opened an old wooden chest in her bedroom, one she hadn't touched in years. Inside were little treasures from her past, handmade quilts, family letters, and a box of toys her children once played with. Dust puffed into the air as she carefully lifted the lid. When Lily saw the toys, wooden blocks, a faded teddy bear, and a tiny porcelain doll, her eyes lit up. "Grandma, these are amazing!" she exclaimed, holding the doll gently as if it were made of glass. Margaret chuckled, memories flooding back. "That doll belonged to your mother when she was your age. She used to carry it everywhere." For the first time in a long time, she spoke freely about the past, not with pain, but with warmth. They spent hours sitting on the living room rug, playing with the old toys, building towers with the blocks, and laughing when they tumbled over. Margaret hadn't laughed like this in years. Her cheeks ached from smiling, but it was the sweetest ache she had ever felt. At one point, Lily looked up at her and asked, "Grandma, why do you keep all these things?" Margaret paused. "Because they remind me of love, of family, of moments that made me happy." She reached over and touched Lily's cheek gently. "And now, I think I'll start saving new memories with you." That afternoon, Lily drew a picture of the two of them together and taped it to Margaret's refrigerator. It was a simple drawing, two figures holding hands under a big sun, but to Margaret, it was a masterpiece, a symbol that her story wasn't ending in loneliness, it was beginning again with love. Sunday morning brought a soft drizzle, and the sound of rain tapping against the windows filled the house. Normally, Margaret would have seen it as another gloomy day, but with Lily around, it felt cozy, like the world outside could pour all it wanted, and they'd still be warm inside together. Margaret decided to bake cookies, something she hadn't done in years. She tied a faded floral apron around her waist and handed Lily a smaller one, folding the strings around her tiny frame. Lily giggled, feeling so important. "I'm your helper today, Grandma," she announced proudly. The kitchen soon filled with laughter and the smell of vanilla and chocolate chips. Lily's little hands struggled to scoop dough onto the tray, leaving messy blobs that stuck to her fingers. Margaret chuckled and gently guided her. "It doesn't have to be perfect, sweetheart. What matters is the love we put in." When the cookies came out golden brown, they sat at the kitchen table, dipping them into glasses of warm milk. Lily bit into hers and said with her mouth full, "Grandma, these are the best cookies ever." Margaret laughed, feeling tears sting her eyes. It wasn't about the cookies. It was about this moment. About finally being needed, wanted, and loved. Then, as the rain slowed and sunlight peeked through the clouds, Lily suddenly said something that froze Margaret's heart. "Grandma, why don't Mommy and Daddy come to see you more? Don't they love you?" Margaret's smile faded. For a second, she didn't know how to answer. She didn't want to burden Lily with the truth, so she placed her hand over the little girls and whispered, "Sometimes people get busy and forget what really matters, but that doesn't mean I don't love them, and it doesn't mean they don't love me." Lily tilted her head thinking, then she whispered firmly, "Well, I'll never forget you, ever." In that moment, Margaret realized maybe love doesn't always come from where we expect it, but when it does come, it's enough to change everything. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Margaret sat alone in the living room with only the soft glow of a lamp beside her. She held Lily's drawing, the one taped on the refrigerator, now carefully taken down and resting in her lap. Two stick figures holding hands, smiling under a bright sun. It was simple, almost childish, yet it carried a message deeper than words. You are not alone anymore. Margaret traced the crayon lines with her finger, her heart heavy with both joy and sadness. Joy because Lily had filled her home with love again. Sadness because her own children hadn't realized how much she needed them. She whispered into the stillness, "Why did it take so long for me to feel this way again?" Her eyes glistened with tears. But for the first time, they weren't only tears of pain, they were tears of healing. Just then, she heard the creak of small footsteps. Lily appeared in the doorway, rubbing her sleepy eyes, her stuffed rabbit dangling from her arm. "Grandma, are you okay?" she asked softly. Margaret quickly wiped her tears and smiled. "Yes, sweetheart, I was just thinking." Without hesitation, Lily walked over, climbed onto her grandmother's lap and nestled against her chest. "Don't be sad, Grandma. You have me now." Her words, so pure and full of love, pierced Margaret's heart in the gentlest way. She wrapped her arms around Lily, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair, and whispered back, "You're right, my love. I have you now, and that's all I need." The clock ticked quietly in the background, but the silence no longer felt empty. It felt safe. It felt alive. And as Margaret rocked Lily gently in her arms, she realized something powerful. Love doesn't fade with age. Sometimes it just takes the right person to remind us it's still there. That night, for the first time in years, Margaret didn't fall asleep feeling forgotten. She drifted off with her granddaughter's promise, echoing in her heart, "You'll never be lonely again." The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, filling the room with warmth. Margaret hummed softly as she prepared breakfast, something she hadn't done in years with such care. The smell of pancakes and sizzling butter drifted through the air. She even set the table with her fine china, the plates she used to reserve only for holidays when her children were young. Today, she thought, Lily deserves to feel special. Lily came bouncing into the kitchen, her messy hair tied up in a lopsided ponytail. "Pancakes, Grandma?" she squealed with delight, her eyes lighting up. "Yes, my little sunshine," Margaret said, smiling so wide it surprised even herself. "But these aren't just ordinary pancakes. These are love pancakes." Lily giggled, tilting her head. "Love pancakes?" "Mm-hmm." Margaret nodded, pretending to be serious. "Every flip of the pan adds a little more love. That's the secret ingredient." Lily laughed so hard she almost fell off the chair. "Then I'm going to eat all the love." Hearing that, Margaret's heart swelled. She placed a stack of golden pancakes in front of her granddaughter, topping them with syrup and fresh strawberries. As Lily dug in, Margaret sat across the table, simply watching her. Every bite, every giggle, every sticky little smile. It was like medicine for a soul that had been starved of affection for so long. Halfway through breakfast, Lily looked up, her mouth still sweet with syrup, and asked innocently, "Grandma, why don't my mom and dad come here more often?" The question hit Margaret like a stone in her chest. She hesitated, her smile faltering. For a moment she wanted to hide her pain, but Lily's curious eyes deserved honesty. "They're busy with their lives, sweetheart," Margaret finally said softly, her voice trembling just a little. "Sometimes grown-ups forget what's most important." Lily frowned. "But you're important. I think they should come see you." Tears welled up in Margaret's eyes, but she blinked them back quickly. She reached across the table, took Lily's small hand in hers and whispered, "Thank you, my darling. You don't know how much it means to me that you think that way." Lily squeezed her grandmother's hand and smiled. "Well, if they won't come, I'll just love you double." At that, Margaret laughed through her tears, feeling her heart heal a little more. The emptiness her children had left behind was slowly being filled, not by their return, but by the innocent, unconditional love of her granddaughter. That morning, with pancakes and promises, a bond stronger than blood was sealed. For the first time in a long time, Margaret felt not just alive, but cherished. Later that afternoon, Margaret decided to do something she hadn't done in years: take a walk to the town's little park. With Lily holding her hand tightly, the two strolled down the familiar path, lined with old oak trees, their leaves whispering softly in the breeze. The town was alive with chatter, children playing, and the sound of bicycles ringing. But for Margaret, every step felt brand new, as if she were rediscovering the world through her granddaughter's eyes. "Grandma, faster," Lily giggled, tugging her hand, skipping ahead with boundless energy. Margaret laughed, slightly out of breath but determined to keep up. "Slow down, love. Your grandma's not a race car." When they reached the park, Lily ran toward the swings, her laughter filling the air. Margaret followed, settling down on a nearby bench, watching her with a smile that refused to leave her face. The sight of Lily swinging higher and higher, her hair flying in the wind, reminded Margaret of when her own children were young, how she used to push them on these very swings. But back then, life was busier, harsher. She had been younger, stricter, always worrying about bills, meals, and responsibilities. Today, she wasn't thinking of any of that. Today, she was simply a grandma watching her little angel fly. "Push me, Grandma," Lily called out, hopping off the swing and running back to her. Margaret stood, her bones aching a little, but her heart brimming with joy. She placed her hands gently on Lily's back and gave her a push. "Hold on tight!" As Lily soared into the air, her laughter echoed across the park. Margaret felt something magical, like her heart was swinging along with her granddaughter, up and down, lighter with every breath. Passers-by glanced at them, smiling at the sight of a joyful grandmother and her radiant little girl. Then, suddenly, Lily hopped off mid-swing and ran back, hugging Margaret tightly around the waist. "You're the best grandma ever," she declared, with the kind of conviction only a child can have. Margaret froze for a moment, overwhelmed. No one had called her the best at anything for so long. Her children had long stopped appreciating her sacrifices. Her neighbors barely noticed her anymore. And yet, here was this little girl, her granddaughter, who saw her not as someone forgotten, but as someone irreplaceable. Margaret knelt down, cupping Lily's cheeks in her wrinkled hands. Her eyes glistened as she whispered, "You've given me a gift I never thought I'd feel again, sweetheart. Happiness." Lily, not fully understanding, but feeling the weight of her grandmother's love, simply kissed her cheek and said, "I'll always make you happy, Grandma. Promise." At that moment, with the sun casting golden rays over the park and Lily's small arms wrapped around her, Margaret realized something profound. She had been searching for love in the wrong places. The love she needed wasn't from her absent children. It was right here, in the pure, unshakable bond with her granddaughter. The park had witnessed countless stories of families, but that day, it became the stage where a neglected grandma found her heart coming alive again. The next morning, Margaret woke up earlier than usual. The house felt different, warmer, fuller, almost alive. She could hear little Lily humming a tune in the kitchen, the sound of spoons clinking against bowls. For a woman who had spent years waking up to silence, that soft hum felt like the most beautiful melody she had ever heard. She slowly got out of bed, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and walked toward the kitchen. What she saw made her heart swell. Lily, standing on a small stool, struggling to pour milk into a bowl of cereal. Her tiny hands trembled, and a little milk spilled onto the counter, but she didn't stop. "Good morning, Grandma," Lily chirped, turning with a proud grin. "I'm making breakfast for us," Margaret chuckled, her voice breaking slightly with emotion. "Oh, sweetheart, you don't have to do all this." "But I want to," Lily insisted, puffing her chest proudly. "Because you always take care of me. Now it's my turn." Margaret walked over, gently wiping the spilled milk with a cloth, then leaned down to kiss her granddaughter's forehead. "You've already done more for me than you'll ever know." They sat at the table, sharing cereal as if it were a royal feast. Margaret savored every bite, not because of the taste, but because of the company. Lily's eyes sparkled with innocence, her chatter filling the space with joy. She talked about her dolls, her favorite cartoons, and the new song she was learning at school. Margaret listened intently, laughing at every little detail, as if each word were a precious gem. For the first time in years, Margaret didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like a forgotten piece of the past. She felt seen, valued, and loved. After breakfast, Lily suddenly stood up and ran to her backpack. She pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to her grandmother. "I made this for you yesterday in school." Margaret unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing. Crayon lines, bright colors, shaky letters. In the middle was a picture of two people holding hands under a big yellow sun. A little girl and an older woman with silver hair. Above it, in uneven handwriting, it said, "Me and Grandma, best friends forever." Tears blurred Margaret's vision. She clutched the paper to her chest and whispered, "No one has ever given me a gift like this." Lily crawled into her lap, wrapping her arms around her neck. "It's true, Grandma. You're my best friend." And in that tender embrace, Margaret realized something extraordinary. Love didn't need to come from everyone. It didn't matter if her children forgot her. As long as she had Lily, her little ray of sunshine, her life still had meaning, warmth, and joy. For a neglected grandma who thought her days of love were over, this was the beginning of something new. The next weekend brought a surprise Margaret never expected. As the autumn breeze swept through the neighborhood, golden leaves scattered across the yard. Margaret was sitting by the window with her knitting needles when she heard Lily's cheerful voice calling from the porch. "Grandma, come outside. I made something for you." Curious, Margaret set her knitting aside and stepped out. There in the backyard, Lily had arranged fallen leaves in the shape of a giant heart. Right in the middle of it, she had placed two small chairs. "This is our secret spot," Lily explained proudly. "Only for me and you." Margaret chuckled softly, her wrinkled face glowing with a smile. "Oh, Lily, it's beautiful." They both sat inside the heart of leaves, sipping the hot cocoa Lily had insisted her mother help prepare. For Margaret, it wasn't just cocoa. It tasted like comfort, like belonging. Lily sipped hers with a chocolate mustache forming on her upper lip, and they both laughed until their sides hurt. "Grandma," Lily said after a moment, her voice soft but steady, "can I tell you a secret?" Margaret leaned closer. "Of course, sweetheart, you can tell me anything." "I don't feel safe when Mom and Dad fight," Lily whispered, her eyes lowering. "But when I'm with you, I feel safe, like nothing bad can happen." Those words pierced Margaret's heart. She reached out, gently brushing Lily's hair back. "Oh, my darling girl, I promise you, as long as I'm here, you'll always have a place where you feel safe. Always." Tears welled up in Lily's eyes, and she hugged her grandmother tightly. Margaret held her just as firmly, realizing that Lily wasn't the only one who had found refuge in their bond. She too felt protected from the crushing loneliness that had shadowed her for years. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the two of them remained in that heart of leaves, holding on to each other. For the first time in so long, Margaret didn't think about the children who had forgotten her. She didn't think about the phone calls that never came, or the birthdays that passed unnoticed. She thought only of Lily, her little granddaughter, her best friend, her lifeline. That evening, as they walked back into the house, Margaret realized something profound. Love, no matter how late it arrives, has the power to heal the deepest wounds. The following week, Margaret woke up to the smell of something unusual in the kitchen. For years, her mornings had been quiet, toast, tea, and silence. But today, the sound of tiny feet rushing around broke that silence. Curious, she shuffled toward the kitchen, her slippers brushing the wooden floor. There she found Lily, standing on a stool, wearing an apron far too big for her, holding a spoon dripping with pancake batter. The counter was a mess, flour dusted everywhere. Eggshells scattered, milk spilled across the surface. Margaret gasped softly, "Lily, what on earth are you doing?" Lily spun around, batter splattered on her cheek, and grinned proudly. "I'm making pancakes for you, Grandma, because you always make things for me, and I wanted to do something special." Margaret's heart swelled so big it hurt. She stepped closer, gently wiping the flour from Lily's nose. "Oh, sweetheart, you didn't have to, but I wanted to," Lily interrupted firmly, her little chin lifting. "You always smile when I eat your cookies. I wanted to see you smile when you eat mine." Margaret laughed softly, tears stinging her eyes as she helped Lily flip the half-burned pancakes. When they finally sat at the table, the pancakes were misshapen, some too thick, others paper-thin, but to Margaret, they were the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. She took a bite and exaggeratedly closed her eyes. These are perfect. Better than any I've ever had." Lily beamed, clapping her hands. "Really?" "Really," Margaret assured, her voice trembling with emotion. As they ate together, Margaret thought back to all the mornings she had spent alone at that same table. The empty chair across from her had always been a reminder of her loneliness. But today, that chair was filled with laughter, chatter, and the warmth of a child who had unknowingly breathed life back into her soul. In that moment, Margaret realized something even deeper. She hadn't just found love again through Lily. She had found purpose, and purpose was what had been missing all along. That morning, as the sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, painting them both in a golden glow, Margaret silently thanked God for sending her granddaughter into her life exactly when she needed her most. A few days later, Margaret received an unexpected invitation. Lily came bouncing into her room, her pigtails flying as she held a piece of bright construction paper. "Grandma, you have to come to my school this Friday. We're having a grandparents' day, and I told everyone you're coming." Margaret froze, the paper trembling slightly in her hands as she read the colorful invitation with glitter glue smeared across the edges. For a moment her heart sank. She hadn't been in a school for decades, and the thought of sitting among other grandparents who were probably younger, more energetic, maybe even more loved, made her feel self-conscious. "But sweetheart," Margaret began carefully, "what if I don't fit in? What if the other children?" Lily cut her off immediately, planting her small hands firmly on her hips. "Grandma, I don't care about the other children. I care about you. You're my favorite person. I want to show everyone how lucky I am." The conviction in her voice melted Margaret's hesitation. She smiled through teary eyes and pulled Lily into a hug. "All right, my love. If it means that much to you, I'll be there." That Friday, Margaret put on her best dress, the pale blue one she hadn't worn in years, the one her late husband used to call her Sunday best. She pinned her silver hair neatly, added a touch of lipstick, and when she looked into the mirror, she almost didn't recognize herself. For the first time in a long time, she felt important. When they arrived at the school, the room was buzzing with chatter, laughter, and colorful decorations. Children proudly clung to their grandparents, leading them to little desks. Lily held Margaret's hand tightly, her face glowing with pride. "Everyone, this is my grandma," Lily announced to her classmates, her voice filled with excitement. Margaret blushed, but the warmth in Lily's words filled her chest with light. They spent the morning drawing together, reading stories, and even joining a group activity where grandparents shared childhood memories. Margaret told the class about growing up without smartphones, playing hide-and-seek until sunset, and baking bread from scratch with her own grandmother. The children listened wide-eyed, hanging on to every word. By the end of the day, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in years, seen, valued, and celebrated. As they walked home, hand in hand, Lily looked up at her and said, "See, Grandma, you're the best. Everyone loved you." Margaret squeezed her granddaughter's hand, her heart overflowing. "No, my darling, it's because of you. You reminded me that I still have so much love left to give and so much life left to live." That night, as Margaret sat in her quiet living room, she realized the truth. She wasn't invisible anymore. Thanks to Lily, she was shining again. The following weekend, Lily arrived with an idea that made Margaret laugh at first. "Grandma," she said, tugging on her arm excitedly, "let's have a sleepover. Just me and you. No mom, no dad, just us." Margaret chuckled. "A sleepover at my age?" But when she saw the determination in Lily's wide eyes, she knew there was no way she could say no. That evening, Lily arrived with a little backpack stuffed full of pajamas, stuffed animals, and a flashlight. She set it all down dramatically, declaring, "This is going to be the best night ever." They started by baking cookies together, Lily sneaking bites of raw dough while Margaret pretended not to notice. The smell of warm chocolate chip cookies filled the small kitchen, wrapping them both in comfort. Afterward, they built a blanket fort in the living room, Margaret helping drape sheets over chairs, while Lily carefully arranged fairy lights inside. When they crawled into the cozy fort, munching on their fresh cookies, Margaret listened to Lily chatter endlessly about school, her friends, and even her secret dreams. "One day, Grandma, I want to be an artist, and when I'm famous, I'll buy you the biggest house in the world so you'll never feel lonely again." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, and she leaned down to kiss her granddaughter's forehead. "Oh, sweetheart, I don't need a big house. You've already given me more joy than I could ever dream of." Later that night, Lily begged her grandma to tell a bedtime story. Margaret's voice, soft and steady, carried tales of her own childhood, of summers spent picking apples, of nights when her mother tucked her in with stories of bravery and kindness. Lily listened, wide-eyed, as if she were hearing the greatest adventure in the world. Eventually, the little girl drifted off to sleep in her grandmother's arms, her tiny hand still clutching Margaret's sleeve. Margaret stayed awake a little longer, watching her chest rise and fall. She realized with a pang of emotion that in this moment, she wasn't just a grandmother filling an empty space in Lily's life. She was needed. She was loved. She was somebody's safe place. As the fairy lights twinkled above them, Margaret whispered softly, "Thank you, my darling Lily, for bringing me back to life." That night, wrapped in warmth and laughter, Margaret slept better than she had in years. The next morning, Margaret woke up to the sound of giggles echoing in the living room. She blinked her eyes open, realizing she had fallen asleep right there in the blanket fort beside Lily. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, making the fairy lights glow faintly, as if the magic of the night had carried into the morning. Lily was already awake, sitting cross-legged with crayons and paper spread out in front of her. When Margaret stretched and asked what she was doing, Lily's face lit up. "I'm making a picture of us, Grandma. Look." Margaret leaned closer and saw a child's drawing, two figures holding hands inside a big, colorful heart. One had silver hair and glasses, the other had pigtails and a wide smile. Above them, Lily had written in big, bold letters, "Best friends forever." Tears pricked Margaret's eyes. She had received cards and flowers in the past from her own children on Mother's Days and birthdays, but none had ever touched her heart the way this simple crayon drawing did. She hugged Lily tightly, whispering, "I'll keep this forever." Later that afternoon, they decided to take a walk through the park. Margaret held Lily's hand as the little girl skipped along, pointing out squirrels, fallen leaves, and even clouds shaped like funny animals. People passing by smiled at the sight of the elderly woman and the lively little girl together. Two souls from different generations, bound so closely it was impossible not to notice their bond. On a park bench, Margaret sat catching her breath while Lily played on the swings. She watched as Lily laughed freely, her golden hair flying in the wind, and Margaret thought to herself, "This child has given me something my heart had forgotten, hope." A young couple sitting nearby leaned over to Margaret. "Is that your granddaughter?" the woman asked kindly. "Yes," Margaret replied, her voice soft but full of pride. "That's my Lily. She looks so happy with you," the man added. Margaret smiled, her eyes fixed on the little girl. "And I've never been happier in my life." As they walked home that evening, Lily slipped her small hand back into Margaret's. "Grandma," she said thoughtfully, "can we always have days like this? Just you and me?" Margaret squeezed her hand, her voice trembling with emotion. "Always, my darling. As long as I'm here, we'll make every day count." That night, as Margaret carefully pinned Lily's crayon drawing to the wall above her bed, she realized something profound. It wasn't just that she was giving Lily memories. Lily was giving her a reason to keep going, a reason to smile, a reason to love again. The following week, something happened that tested Margaret's strength. One evening, after Lily had gone home, Margaret sat alone in her living room, staring at the crayon drawing taped to the wall. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't lonely, but she felt a pang of fear. What if this didn't last? What if, like so many people before, Lily too would one day drift away? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock at the door. It was Lily, bundled up in her coat, cheeks red from the cold, holding her mother's hand. "Grandma," she shouted, racing inside before her mom could say a word. "I couldn't sleep without you tonight. I begged Mom to bring me." Margaret's heart melted instantly. She knelt down and pulled Lily into her arms. "Oh, my precious girl, you came all the way here just for me?" Lily nodded seriously. "I told Mom you're my favorite person in the whole wide world, and I don't care if people think I'm silly. I want to be with you." Her mother smiled softly from the doorway. For the first time, Margaret noticed a glimmer of gratitude in her eyes. "Mom," she said gently, "I don't say this enough, but thank you. Thank you for being there for Lily. She needs you, and honestly, so do I." Those words struck Margaret like a bolt of lightning. For years she had felt like a burden, like her family had moved on without her. But now, here was her daughter, admitting something Margaret had longed to hear, that she was needed. Truly needed. That night, after Lily fell asleep in her bed, Margaret sat quietly with her daughter over a cup of tea. They talked, not about old resentments or regrets, but about the present, about Lily, about love. For the first time in decades, Margaret felt the walls of distance begin to crumble. As she tucked Lily in later, Margaret whispered, "You didn't just bring joy back into my life, sweetheart. You helped bring our family back together." Standing there in the soft glow of the lamp, Margaret realized something powerful. Love doesn't just heal loneliness. It can rebuild broken bridges, even the ones you thought were gone forever. The day finally came when Margaret understood just how much her life had changed. It was a Sunday afternoon, and the whole family had gathered in her small house, something that hadn't happened in years. The living room was filled with laughter, the smell of freshly baked cookies, and the sound of Lily's bright voice telling stories to anyone who would listen. Margaret sat in her favorite chair, watching as her daughter and son-in-law helped set the table, as Lily decorated it with little paper flowers she had made. For years, Margaret had eaten alone at that same table, staring at the empty chairs. Now, every seat was filled, every corner buzzing with life. When it was time to eat, Lily stood up suddenly, holding a piece of paper. "Wait, I have something to say," she announced proudly. The room grew quiet as she began to read a little note she had written. "My grandma is my best friend. She makes me laugh when I'm sad. She tells me stories that make my heart happy, and she loves me more than anything in the world. I'm the luckiest girl because I have her." By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Margaret covered her face with her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her daughter reached over, squeezing her hand. "Mom, Lily's right. You're the heart of this family. We should have told you that long ago." Margaret, overwhelmed, whispered through her tears, "All I ever wanted was to feel loved again, and you've all given me that." That evening, as the sun set outside the window, Margaret found herself surrounded by the very thing she thought she had lost forever: family, warmth, love. Lily curled up in her lap, resting her head against her chest, and for the first time in decades, Margaret felt completely whole. She looked around the room, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I thought my story was ending," she said softly, "but thanks to you, it's just beginning again." In that moment, Margaret realized the greatest truth of all. Love doesn't fade with age. Sometimes, it returns when you least expect it, through the smallest hands and the purest hearts. And for her, that love had arrived in the form of a little granddaughter named Lily. Sometimes life takes us through loneliness and pain, but God always sends love and hope back through someone special. The value of love and family never fades with age. In fact, it grows deeper with time. Even a small smile, a kind word, or a genuine bond can brighten an entire life. Always cherish and respect your loved ones, because the greatest treasure we have is often hidden in their hearts.